So, well, Russia and the US and China are all obviously having enormous influence on the geopolitical landscape, but some in ways that they're not expecting. So Russia, Vladimir Putin, I think, believes he's playing a long-term game of chess, when actually I think he's playing short-term checkers. So annexation of Crimea is successful from his point of view. Key player in Syria and key player obviously in Iran as well. But as a reaction to Russian aggression, saber-rattling Europe, interference in elections, some interesting things are happening. The first is the way that Europe is reacting. The first is Europe is now getting serious about its defense, which I think is new news. In terms of spending, in terms of NATO now having a second breath, in terms of the neutrals, or some neutrals rethinking their neutrality, in terms of PESCO coming back, the security and cooperation policy of Europe coming back on the table, its ability to conduct autonomous missions, all are now being discussed seriously thanks to Vladimir Putin. The second, which is actually I think more interesting, is Europe is finally putting into place a true European energy policy, and that's new news. So gas flows are now moving not only east to west, but west to east, north to south, south to north. And the energy islands that used to exist in the past are now diminishing. And the interconnections, thanks to gas and also electricity, are making Europe more and more a true single energy market, which is very significant because it reduces Russia's ability to influence Europe through the use of gas supplies. The third is that Europe is going to finally get serious, as the United States is as well, about countering disinformation after the efforts to influence elections. In terms of the US, very briefly, I made my views clear yesterday in our session, but I think the consequences of the actions of this administration will in fact be counterproductive in many ways. US influence is being hollowed out in some important ways in terms of the US brand value, in terms of soft power abroad, which is a critical part of why the United States has been so influential for decades. We have withdrawn, or we are withdrawing from a number of key areas of the world in terms of the Balkans, allowing vacuums to appear and for other countries, particularly Russia, but not only, to exert its influence there. Same in Africa through our hollowing out of foreign aid, delivering more that part of the world to Chinese influence, and hollowing out economic power over the long term by exploding our deficits and our debt to GDP, and over time, I think, also leading some countries to question whether the United States will be as good an investment as it has in the past. But this is my final point on the United States is, I think, the most important. On trade policy, this is where we are actually conducting counterproductive policies. By withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Agreement, the other countries, of course, moved ahead, minus the intellectual property and the investor-state dispute settlement provisions, and now we're thinking of rejoining, but on different terms. Because of our policies, the EU has signed quicker than it would have without us its agreement with Japan, and is on the way to signing other agreements. Of course, it's signed the deal with Canada, and is exporting its standards and its values without the United States, which I think is unfortunate. And we are now in the process of putting into place unilateral trade restrictive measures, including under the Section 232 for national security reasons at a time of peace, which will lead other countries presumably to do precisely the same, and that opens up a Pandora's box. The only country, and here I'll end, the only country that I see pursuing a stable, long-term strategic policy is China, and it's impressive to watch. Not all of us, I think, will share its visions of what it's doing in the South China Sea or its support for North Korea and that regime, but it is the only country pursuing a long-term strategy. I do have some question marks, however, about whether this is sustainable, not only because of the age pyramid inverting very quickly, but more so the implications of single-man rule over the long term, which is now what appears to be Xi Jinping's policies. It has not been a good model for China in the past.